I think everyone has that one game in their library that they've sunk countless hours into. I think TF2 and Rust are the two most common examples that I've seen people play well past the 1,000-hour mark, but I've seen some other games too, like League of Legends if you're one of those self-deprecating types, DayZ, CSGO. Now, as pathetic as it may seem to spend so much of your life on a singular game, at the same time, you really can't help it. There's always an aspect to these games that just reels you in, whether it's because they're simply enjoyable, or there's some aura of nostalgia to them, or maybe it's that social element that keeps you hooked.
Like my puta, you piece of shit! Fucking stupid F2P, someone kick this man!
Multiplayer games are always an easy way for you to meet a whole bunch of interesting characters, some of which can wind up becoming lifelong friends. Now, where am I going with all of this? Well, one of my most played games that ticks all of those boxes is one that you might have never played, or maybe you have played it, and if that's the case, I don't really know what to say. You kinda just ruined this entire intro and title of this video, congrats. Nah, but in all seriousness, this was a game that was never super popular. It garnered some attention, but it never took off. It always remained as an underground niche game, and before I go into any more details, I might as well cut straight to the chase. Depth is a multiplayer first-person shooter that was released on November 3rd, 2014. This was my jam. This was my time sink game, with me having clocked a little under 650 hours on it, which I know you're gonna say, oh, those are rookie numbers, and honestly, you're not wrong, that total playtime is a little pitiful. But nevertheless, in its prime, Depth felt like my big time sink. Every day after school, I'd hop on it and played exactly like I had zero responsibilities. Maybe it was a little sad, but I regret nothing. It was fun, and I wish I could go back to those days. It's a little funny, too. Competitive first-person shooters aren't really my thing, especially as I grow older. I mean, like, I'll play them with friends, but most of the time I'll be taking the piss out of them. I'll rarely ever be super serious about them, and I hardly ever go out of my way to play them by myself. But Depth is a different story. This was a game that kept me hooked, and it made me care enough to try and get better at playing it. I think this was because of two reasons, one being that Depth is an asymmetrical FPS, which I know that might seem like a big word, but I'm gonna break it down Barney style for you. An asymmetrical FPS, or an asymmetrical multiplayer, is a game where two or more opposing teams have completely different gameplay compared to one another. Not to be confused with hero-based shooters like TF2 or Overwatch, where both teams have the same list of characters to choose from that all have unique playstyles. Examples of asymmetrical FPSs or multiplayers are Left 4 Dead's Versus modes, Primal Carnage Extinction, or the most popular example being Dead by Daylight, where the survivor team has to focus on powering all the generators and escaping the killer player, while the killer has to do everything in its power to stop the survivors from completing their objective. In Depth's case, there's the divers and the sharks.
Come get me, Zag. I need to die. I need to get into fucking health, bro. Oh, never mind.
Okay, come get me, Zag shoots me. The fuck up.
Well, I mean, come on, I gotta try.
The diver team is more or less your standard first-person shooter affair. I always like to compare the main game mode, Blood and Gold, to something like the payload objectives from TF2, because in a way, that's pretty much what it is. You've got a team of 3 other divers and this little submersible named Steve that you have to defend and deliver to 4 checkpoints around the map before making your way back to spawn. At these checkpoints, Steve will work on opening a vault that once he cracks open, you and your team will be paid a nice paycheck of $1,000 that you can use to upgrade your weapons, buy better weapons, or buy equipment to help defend Steve. You can also add a little more to your team's balance by collecting treasures that are scattered around the map. Be careful when you're out treasure hunting though, because you become a prime target for the sharks, and if you die, your team's life count drops by 1. If it goes all the way down to 0 before Steve gets brought back to spawn, the sharks win the game. In the case of the sharks, which is actually the second reason why Depth got me hooked, because, you know, sharks. are cool. It's only you and one other player, but you've got a handful of shark species to choose from, with each having their own playstyles that help mitigate this drastic decrease in team members. As a shark, your only two objectives are to bring the divers team's lives down to 0 or destroy Steve. Most shark players go for the former because the latter is way too much of a hassle. Every time you kill a diver, you're rewarded with a few evolution points that you can use to buy some perks that'll help you survive a bit longer, or you can use them to upgrade your main ability. Number one tip I could give right off the bat: do not sleep on this. In most cases, the difference between having your main ability be activated and deactivated is life or death. I see a lot of new players picking sharks and never really using them to their full potential. Like with the Great White's ability, they gain a temporary armor boost which can make them a little annoying to deal with sometimes. Or the bull shark, which gains a temporary damage and health boost, making them borderline OP, and in the right hands they can easily wipe an entire team single-handedly. Then you've got the Thresher, where you really can't just ignore its ability because it has such a vital role in its playstyle. If you're ever in a situation where you've taken a nasty beating from the divers, you can always swim out into the open ocean and munch on a few seals to regain your health or clear up some of the debuffs. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot to mention, if you want to actually do damage as a shark, you literally have to thrash your mouse around while a diver or a seal is in your mouth. Interesting gameplay gimmick, I know. Not entirely sure if it's the best. I mean, I'd imagine it's an absolute nightmare to deal with for those who have carpal tunnel syndrome, having to all of a sudden vigorously shake your mouse in order to play the game, but if it works, I guess. Apart from Blood and Gold, there's other game modes too, like Megalodon Hunt, Hide and Seek, and Haywire, but no one really plays them anymore. I find it hard to put into words exactly why I admire this game as much as I do. I think all in all, it has something to do with the fact that it's such an awesome idea for a first-person shooter that is executed surprisingly well. Some asymmetrical games usually run into the issues of feeling unbalanced, or at worst feeling very messy and chaotic, but that solves the question of how exactly do you make two opposing teams that play completely differently to one another compete in a way that makes sense and isn't all-out warfare. The answer in this case was Blood and Gold, a game mode where divers constantly need to take risks in order to benefit themselves and their team, while the sharks have to capitalize on every opportunity they have to strike. The end result is a game that is equal parts fast-paced, intense, and very strategic for both sides. I feel like there just aren't a lot of games on the market that have nailed this down as perfectly as Depth. There were some that seemed like they were getting close, like Evolve, but we all know how that story ended. However, something to note is that Depth wasn't always like this. In fact, the original idea for it was completely different to what we ended up getting, and the game went through a rather rocky, lengthy development cycle. Let's go all the way back to the year 2006, when a passionate Unreal Tournament modder by the name of Alex Quick, who you might know for his work on the Killing Floor games, just announced the development of a little project he's been putting a little bit of work into. As you can already guess, this project was none other than Depth. A mod where you can choose to play as a diver, going on deep ocean treasure hunts while stealthily swimming past bloodthirsty sharks, or the sharks where you'll have to keep the pesky divers away from your domain. The entire focus of Depth during this very early phase of development was atmosphere more than anything else. This was kind of like a team deathmatch, hide and seek, cat and mouse type game that had a huge emphasis on slow intense gameplay as well as having some horror mixed in. It was strongly encouraged for divers to hide from and straight up avoid the sharks as best they could, while the sharks had to heavily rely on their senses to snuff out the divers who are a little too greedy. Eventually Depth started growing into an even bigger project, and around 2012 it was moved over to Unreal Engine 3 and was starting to become a standalone game with its own dedicated development team. I also want to quickly bring up something a little interesting, which is that every official Depth source will tell you that for some reason the development of the game started back in 2009 and no further than that. But looking at Alex Quick's very own ModDB page, it is shown that Depth started as far back as 2006. Why is there such a huge discrepancy here? I'm not entirely sure, but I kinda want answers. Also, don't know if the mod was planned to be multiplayer or single player. Depth's website clearly states that Depth started off as being strictly single player, but going off in an interview with Alex Quick, it seemed like he was implying the opposite. Again, I don't really know what to believe here. I kind of feel like I just stumbled into something conspiratorial here. Anyways, when Depth got ported over to Unreal Engine 3, the original concept still remained the same, but since it was fully standalone, there was a lot more wiggle room for cooler features. And my god, did they go crazy with that. The few that I was able to dredge up were diver classes, with there being a watcher whose sole purpose is to ping shark locations to teammates, a seeker that was meant to be a speedy treasure collector, and a hunter, which is pretty self-explanatory. There was also supposed to be a huge dismemberment system where sharks would be able to deal 2 different types of attacks. One would focus on the diver's upper body, while the other the lower body. Depending on which portion of the body was attacked, it would significantly affect the diver's gameplay. Like if the lower body was badly damaged, it would affect swim speed, and if it was the upper body, it would prevent the divers from carrying certain weapons. Divers would also be able to lose multiple limbs, causing severe bleeding if they managed to somehow escape their shark attack. And the last one I found was that sea creatures were going to play a much larger role in the gameplay. Jellyfishes, for example, were going to be harmful for both divers and sharks. Schools of pilotfish were also going to be a food source for sharks, along with seals, which I know makes zero sense since most if not all shark species have a symbiotic relationship with pilotfish. But for divers on the other hand, they were able to startle these schools and completely throw off a shark player's electroreceptive sensors. I totally get why this one ended up on the cutting room floor. It didn't really make much sense for what the game would eventually become, but it bums me out a little that what was left of the sea creatures got shoved into a purely ambient game setting that most players, myself included, have turned off because it's a little distracting. There's also multiple videos that showcase Depth's early gameplay, and it's really crazy to see how different this is from the final product. I can recognize a lot of the maps that were featured here, but it's so weird seeing them have such an open design. Diver gameplay also looked a lot slower too, makes sense considering that they were still trying to make it more stealth survival rather than pure PvP, and Steve is completely absent here. Instead, the divers simply have to deliver gold to their cages and meet a quota in order to win. Honestly, as different as this is, I can't exactly say I'd be opposed if this is what we ended up getting. Going off of what's shown here, this definitely seems like it would have been way more intense, especially when it comes to diver gameplay. But you can already surmise that this whole concept didn't really work out and was scrapped entirely.
On September 14, 2012,
the development of Depth was put on an indefinite hiatus for 2 reasons. One was because it was quickly becoming a very ambitious project that was hard to manage with such a small team. And secondly, the developers ran into a bit of a conundrum, with the game feeling way more diver-sided, and playing as a shark was either way too confusing or flat out boring. They had to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate everything down to the game's core, which unfortunately brought the whole project to a screeching halt. Until 2013, just 1 year later, a partnership arose between the Depth team and a New Zealand-based studio, Digital Confectioners, that kickstarted the game's development again and completely shifted focus away from the slow stealth survival-based gameplay of the original concept to the more streamlined competitive asymmetrical gameplay that we're all familiar with today.
Oh my god! Where is he?
It's too fast!
I just saw him fly in and I couldn't find him again.
Dude, these new players are too fast, dude.
Oh my god, we're almost out of respawns.
I'm too old for this shit.
I know, man. This is it's too fucking hard. Oh my god, rip. I'm taking the last respawn, I guess.
We should just play Shark Bite, dude.
Yeah, dude, for real.
As you know, the game came out on November 3rd, 2014, and has gotten numerous content updates post-launch, the first of which being the Big Catch update released December 2014. This update increased the shark roster, which at first only had the Great White, now included the Mako and Tiger, as well as an assortment of other goodies. Pretty much every other update always added a new shark species, as well as a bunch of content for divers to play around with and a new map. It was looking great for a while, and you might be sitting there saying to yourself, "Wow, I want to play Depth, I want to be a shark." Well, too bad. You can't. Well, actually you can. It's not like the game's been delisted or anything, but have you seen the player count these days? Yeah, not looking too good there, Chief. Depth always had a small player count. As I've mentioned earlier, the game's always been underground and niche. In its prime, the player count consistently sat somewhere in the lower to mid hundreds, with occasional spikes going up to the thousands on a sale, and on 2 separate occasions it broke to 10,000. Now it hovers around a measly 30 players, with the spikes only really going up to 50. So why is it like this? Well, the most obvious answer being the fact that on January 18th, 2022, Digital Confectioners officially announced that Depth will be sunsetting, stating that the game will no longer be receiving any new updates, whether it be content or simple balance changes. In hindsight, this decision makes sense. Digital Confectioners were always a really small indie studio. I mean, prior to picking up Depth, they were mostly a contracting studio that specialized in the Unreal Engine, and during the company's infancy, they mostly got involved in some real small-time projects like the Ball and Cube. So of course, it was probably hard for them to keep throwing money, time, and effort away on a game that, while it did garner a small appreciative cult following, it was also a game that was becoming 8 years old, and it never really took off in any way that was beneficial to them as a business. It probably got to a point where it would have been better to just throw in the towel, take all of this as a learning experience, and move on to greener pastures. So I guess this all begs an even bigger question. Why did Depth struggle to get any bit of mainstream success, and how did it all come to this? For such a unique multiplayer game that allowed you to play as a shark, one of the coolest animals on the planet, it should have been a home run for anyone that enjoyed the classic Jaws games or the movies. And come on, you can't tell me that there's only this many people out there that are a loyal fan of those things or just plain shark nerds. Like it is with most things, Depth's decline is based on multiple different factors that all eventually culminated into one very slow snowball effect that rolled its way into the unfortunate sunsetting announcement.
Oh my god, you guys are both sharks.
Oh no. Oh no. Dude, we're gonna lose.
I think I'm gonna get shitted on, dude.
Dude, I'm gonna fucking lose, man.
I don't know where my teammates are. They didn't draw privates. I don't know how good they are. I'm actually kind of concerned about this round. This one's not gonna be fun.
Dude, I'm gonna lose because I'm with fucking Kyle, dude.
Dude, Kyle's gonna carry, dude.
Bruh,
I'm joking.
I'm gonna carry you, man.
To start things off, one of those things that didn't do Depth any favors in terms of gaining popularity was its marketing, or lack thereof. The game got trailers for every major update for a while, but when you take a look at one like the Blood and Gold trailer, despite being named after the game's main mode, I don't think this gives you the slightest hint on how it's actually played. Like, there's sharks, there's guns, treasures, but just going off of that, your guess on what this is all about is as good as any. Actually, Steve, the focal point of this whole game mode, is shown off here like he's a minor character. You just see him floating or swimming around in the background sometimes. Let's also not forget about the fact that you've got Ren from Ren and Stimpy narrating some of these trailers.
Bad news is, there's no sharks in these waters. The Mako is fast as hell, and twice as mean. Now the good news, there's a flooded mine not far from here. And my source tells me it's packed with treasure. Sharks are just fish. They give you trouble, you show them who's the boss.
It was all pretty goofy, in a good way. But yeah, like I've said, probably didn't do Digital Confectioners any favors. Regardless, in its youth, Depth still managed to grab the attention of some bigger name content creators, notably Jacksepticeye, Markiplier, and some of the members of the Vanoss crew, but most of them did like, what, a video or two on the game before moving on to something else? After that initial hype, the only other creators that stuck around for Depth were the Gaming Beaver, Bestinslaw, Omrecker, and there's probably a few more that I'm not entirely aware of. The game's popularity at that point was entirely dependent mostly on these remaining creators and seemingly by complete word of mouth. According to a game developer blog post by Depth's technical director James Tan, this was pretty much their only marketing strategy. Just to release the game, have journalists cover it, which would cause content creators to pick up on it and make videos, and those videos essentially act as free advertisement. Then after that, it's profit, I guess. Now, I'm no businessman, but I don't think I need a big fancy paperweight to tell you that this whole strategy didn't really work. When it comes to a plan like this, you're gonna gain interest in whatever you're trying to market, but it's not going to last very long unless if you actively keep trying to make your product interesting, which is what Deco failed to do. Yes, a game where divers are pitted against sharks sounds fun, but how long is the average player going to be engaged and entertained by something like this with just regular content updates and skins? Deco had a bit of a solution to this. In May 2015, they set up a collaboration with another game that is totally unrelated to sharks, and that game was Chivalry. This collaboration added in medieval-themed skins that were obtainable by owning both games, a map that was freely available to anyone, and all of this actually seemed to work out pretty well. Depth enjoyed its very first free weekend spike 2 months later, with the player count going up to 10,000, and afterwards the game consistently always peaked around the upper hundreds. But here's the thing. This was the only time they ever did anything like this. I'm assuming it's because of pretty rough financial issues. James Tan goes into some detail about how digital confectioners were always able to pay their employees on time, but they were also always dangerously close to being in the red, as he describes it. In order to get paid a little more, employees would oftentimes take a step away from Depth and continue doing contract work. Now, all of this does seem like it was a little before Depth's release, but I think it's also safe to say that these financial issues were most likely always present. No! This game's stressful, dude.
Bro, this game is taking away at least 5 years of my life. All right.
After this performance, good. No.
Another thing is that Depth always suffered from a pretty high skill ceiling. As a diver, it's an easy game. It's just like your Call of Duties or your CSGOs, except it's underwater and you've got omnidirectional aim. If you've ever played an FPS before, you've got nothing to worry about. The only thing you really have to hone in on is your sense of hearing, because that's what you're going to have to rely on in order to avoid sharks sometimes. And don't get too cocky about treasure hunting, because it's not going to work out too well for you most of the time. Playing as a shark, though, is a different beast entirely. Some would argue that divers are totally overpowered, since they have access to a whole bunch of weapons, some of which have the potential to insta-kill, but in all my 7 years of playing this game, I've never once thought this. Yes, there are some insta-kill weapons, but these are pretty expensive, and so long as you can keep denying the divers access to gold, it might be a bit of a challenge for them to get their hands anywhere near these kinds of weapons, which admittedly is something that's a lot easier said than done. That's kind of the thing when it comes to playing Shark though. It's all about making the most out of every little opportunity you have, and also communicating with your only teammate. It's a lot harder when there's only two of you for sure, because you know, if one dude isn't pulling their weight and you're not good enough to solo carry, the entire match just becomes a tedious uphill battle. I can imagine it's a little disheartening for some new players to come to the realization that one of the main appeals of Depth is actually the most challenging thing to play around with. Even with all my 600 hours of playtime, I still haven't even come close to mastering the art of the shark. There was a time for a little while though where I actually preferred Shark over Diver. It all started after about my first 500 Diver games. I took a step back and decided, you know what? I'm going to take the time to understand the other half of this game that I've been completely ignoring. Of course, I sucked absolute eggs at first. It never seemed like I had a good enough opportunity to attack, and when I did, it seemed like the divers predicted my every move. I'd waste lives just trying to get kills. But then on one faithful game, some totally random idea struck my peanut of a brain, which came to me from all the random nature documentaries I've mindlessly watched. I asked myself, how do sharks normally hunt IRL? Well, if we're talking about a great white here, they normally like to strike their prey from below. They're basically ambush predators. So I did that, and I'll be damned, it worked wonders. I got kill after kill after kill, just grabbing divers from below and then going back for seconds. If I wasn't able to do that, then I would try to strike from odd, unpredictable angles. Then something else clicked with me. Even though communication might be minimal sometimes with me and my teammate, the least I could do is synchronize my attacks with them. Every time they go in, all the divers hyper-focus on trying to take them out and save their teammate. So theoretically, if I go in with my teammate, then the divers have two targets they need to worry about at the same time, making it a huge hassle for them. Lo and behold, my theory worked. This was such a simple way to gain a bit of a fighting chance over what many new players might deem a bit of an unfair matchup between divers and sharks. Of course, these strats aren't guaranteed, and there's a bit more to it than that, but for the most part, following these basic principles worked for me, and I started regularly queuing as a shark, until I took a bit of a long hiatus from the game, and now I'm just very rusty and out of practice.
We're both sharks. Okay.
Oh, we're gonna lose. Oh my god, we're gonna lose.
I don't doubt it.
Truthfully, I don't even think I can get good at Shark anymore, because another problem that slowly arose from Depth's small player count was that the only people you encounter while playing, especially now, are toxic veterans, chill veterans who are just checking up on what was once their favorite game, and the occasional casual or newbie. 2 out of those 3 player types will wipe the floor with anyone trying to get into Depth, whether they're new or they're someone like me just trying to get their bearings straight again, and it is immensely discouraging to get destroyed by these people. The thing is, your only two real options here are to either suck it up and try to learn by playing with seasoned veterans, or just quit the game. Looking at the player count throughout Depth's entire lifespan, it's clear to see what option most players understandably went with. The problem is there was never an easy fix to this. I mean, the obvious one would be to implement a skill-based matchmaking system, and apparently Depth already has this, but the thing is the player count was never big enough to support it, so it just doesn't really work. Some veterans would also try easing new players into the game by making guides for them, most notable of which being the How to Shark and How to Dive guides by Ray. Both of these guides have been around for about as long as I can remember, and they are a treasure trove of all sorts of information for both teams. Another one which I wish I would have found out about way sooner is Vertroyer's How a Shark Thinks series. A bunch of videos where he commentates over his shark gameplay and brings up the importance of even the tiniest movements. This guy has shark gameplay down to a science. It is both interesting and amazing to watch. And I don't mean to shamelessly plug myself in here, but it also reminds me of my own attempt at trying to be a Depth content creator, although it was nowhere near as impressive as that. Back when I first started this channel, doing videos like these seemed like an absolute pipe dream to me, so the only other thing I could think about doing is making mostly unedited and unscripted videos on this game that I loved in hopes of giving Depth the attention I think it deserved. Of course, that plan failed miserably. I'm gonna try to upload more frequently now that I don't have to like worry about school and stuff. So I'm gonna take like this 3 months that I have off to try to upload more often. And that's the only bit of that video you'll ever see because it was hot garbage, and if you think my voice is annoying now, it wasn't any better 5 years ago, let me tell you. Now, as bad as the poor marketing strategies and high skill ceiling problems were for Depth, the game lived on fine for the most part with those issues. A topic that was frequently brought up in the discussions ad nauseum in the past was, is Depth dying? And the general consensus for a while was, no, it wasn't. Yes, the game had a small player base that remained very stagnant, yes, the queue times weren't exactly the best sometimes, and yes, the game was really hard to get into, but despite all of that, it was still large enough to grow a dedicated fan base and a bustling community. So in a way, none of those issues really killed Depth, they just made it hard for the game to become popular and appealing to a wider audience. It sucked, people wished for the opposite, but it was never really much of a concern for regular players. They just kept on trucking and enjoying the most out of their small game. However, things would slowly start taking a turn for the worst on July 19th, 2018. Amidst the Battle Royale craze, digital confectioners did the unthinkable, and that was making underwater PUBG. With sharks. On August 27th, 2018, King Tide or Last Tide, I don't know, the game went through a name change and it confuses the hell out of me, was released to a resounding sigh from the Depth community. Not really one of disappointment, but more like confusion, like a big, but why? It felt unnecessary, it felt forced, like a cheap cash grab trying to jump on the Battle Royale hype train. Nevertheless, King Tide still garnered some attention from big-name streamers and YouTubers like Shroud, Dr. Disrespect, Vinesauce Vinny, KYR Speedy. Okay, you already probably know where this is going. Last Tide unfortunately died a miserable, humiliating death because a big problem, at least for me anyways, was that the game wasn't really all that fun. I only played it during its open beta, and it was basically an over-glorified open ocean swimming simulator with an occasional AI shark that will pop out and try to kill you. Now, as much as I'd love to provide actual gameplay footage of me playing King Tide, I never actually bought the game, and a few months ago it got delisted from Steam and its servers were shut down. So, yeah. According to SteamDB, the game only lasted 2 months, with the player count already taking a steep nosedive on the day of its release. It was sad, but Deco decided to keep pushing on with their focus being divided between Depth and trying to support the sinking ship that was Last Tide. This, of course, was a recipe for disaster and effectively marked the true beginning of the end for Depth. At first, things seemed normal. Depth would get its regular Battle Pass events, which, say what you will about Battle Passes, I think Depth did them right. It was always fun to participate in them, they weren't terribly hard to go through, and they gave you an ample amount of time to complete them, as well as spiking the player count a little bit every time a new one would start. Content updates were still regular and fairly substantial, albeit most of the weapons introduced in these updates became asset flips for King Tide, large majority of which were very poorly received by the community. But then you had updates like the Snowfall 2018 event bringing in kindred species, or basically Echo Fighters from Smash Bros. In shark form. The first of which was the Blue Shark, which was a kindred species to the Mako, and shortly after that there was the Lemon to the Tiger and Copper to the Bull. But these updates only really lasted from late 2018 to early 2019. After that, it was just event after event with nothing new except for skins that were also starting to become worse and worse. The event themes were also getting recycled. Players were starting to get used to seeing some variation of the Meltdown event every year, or Chinese New Year, Haywire, Mutiny. Most players were not only upset with the direction the game was heading in, but were also starting to lose interest because grinding away on the same seasonal event earning skins that in the grand scheme of things really didn't matter that much can only be entertaining for so long until it quickly starts becoming boring. I clocked out of depth around this time. If I remember correctly, it might have been when the Copper just got added in, so this was like April 2019. I think I was starting to get to a point where I was feeling very unsatisfied with the game. It wasn't the direction the game was starting to head in that got to me, but more so feeling very burned out, exhausted, and just suddenly becoming increasingly impatient with a game that I actually had a lot of patience for given its type. Matches no longer felt fun to me no matter what the outcome was or what side I was playing on. If I lost, I wouldn't take it as a learning experience like I once did, I'd just become frustrated and pissy. And if I won, then I only felt relieved. Not exactly happy or proud, just a brief moment of relief knowing that the match wasn't another one for the trash bin. You don't need to be some sort of psychologist to tell me that this wasn't healthy. Having a singular game that dictated my mood for the whole day. And of course, I quit depth shortly after with a bitter taste in my mouth. I think I left at a good time though. The last real update depth got was from the Tales from the Void 2020 event that added what would unfortunately be the last kindred species in the game from an extensive list that was shown off years prior. This was the Big Eye Thresher. Okay, technically there was another content update after Big Eye. Hadal Horror 2020 brought in the EMP mines, but my god, these things are absolutely useless and didn't shake up the game in any way whatsoever. 2021 was the only year where players actually got new events that weren't recycles, with Spoils of Atlantis, Blood in the Pacific, Ragnarok, Operation Sea Fog, and Retro Future Christmas. But at this point, it was already too late. The damage had been done, the game's player count steadily started dropping well below the numbers it used to comfortably sit at, and it's never been able to recover. Then, right around the start of the new year, the sunsetting announcement came to no one's surprise. Everyone saw it coming from miles away and knew that the game was clinging on to life support for way too long. It was disappointing, with loads of promises being broken, such as a potential optimization update that would have given depth proper DirectX 9 and 10 support, or an update that would have balanced diver equipment, and for the longest time there were even talks about a depth 2, that might have just been complete hearsay, but it was fun to think about something like that. But alas, what was anyone going to do? As the years have gone by, the once loving community of depth became an empty husk of its former self, like a bleached coral reef being totally void of any life and just being the ruins of something that was once a lively, small environment. Depth remains to be fully playable to this very day, and as much as I'd love for one of my favorite multiplayer games to go back to a state that it was once in, I can't recommend it to anyone. For $20, you're getting ripped off for a game that's long been abandoned and forgotten about. I have to say, it's a shame to see freshies in a match sometimes, knowing that if they came a little earlier, they still would have had something more to enjoy. I see a lot of people bring up in the forums or reviews that depth should go free to play, but especially now more than ever before, I don't think that's an option for a company as small as Deco. Maybe if they would have kept working on their latest title, Dreadhunger, which actually received a good bit of popularity, it might have been financially feasible to have depth go free to play, but as is the case with every game they've released, Dreadhunger only lasted for so long until it was shut down and delisted. Giving depth to another studio or allowing the community to make updates for it is entirely out of the question too, since apparently the hardware it runs on is so old and unstable that it might be too much of a pain to work with. So with that, the unique, original idea and concept behind Depth is effectively dead, with the chances of it being revived in any conceivable way being slim to none. As I've said before though, it is understandable why Deco did this, and it is a miracle that Depth lasted for as long as it did, all things considered. It's disheartening to know that nothing new will ever come to the game, and it's another grand reminder that these online multiplayers have a huge expiration date. While the servers for Depth are still up, and the devs have expressed that they want to keep them up for as long as possible, there will eventually come a day where they will shut down, and I'm glad I made this before that happened. This has been a video that's been sitting on the back burner on and off ever since I've started making these kinds of videos, mainly because I always felt very hesitant about it. I had a lot of conflicting thoughts telling me that I should move on and doing something like this would be a complete waste of my time, while also having the thought of giving this game that I poured so much of my time into and is also inadvertently the reason why I started this channel in the first place, a proper send-off. I was very unsure of what I wanted to do, but ultimately I decided to try the latter option and see how it goes. I recorded 182 gigs worth of footage, most of which are me and my friends kicking back and enjoying a game we haven't played in years. There was an inexplicable simplicity to Depth this time around that just brought us back to the first days we've ever played this game back in October 2016. I loved it. I loved it way more than I ever thought I would, and it was reassuring knowing that the resentment I once held for this game was gone. My born-again admiration for Depth gave me the confidence to finally start working on this video that for the longest time I was so indecisive about. Even though the future of Depth is mostly bleak and uncertain, I am at least grateful that I was still able to go back and enjoy it. I can still reminisce about the countless memories I've made, and more importantly, be in somewhat of a position where I can finally talk about it and share it to the people who haven't heard about it. A game that had all sorts of potential but was just never able to fully spread its wings. A game that on a deep personal level is irreplaceable to me and is truly one of a kind. And I did all of this before it inevitably gets laid to rest for good.
Oh shit.
Oh my god, my game just fucking crashed.
Are you for real?
Dude, what the
With
fuck?
fucking 14 kills, the game has to crash? Like, this guy's doing too fucking good.
That's fucked up, dude.